Welcome, everyone. I'm Tom Christie here with d20play. I got Griffith Morgan with us, our special guest. We're going
Oh,
to talk about all things Blackmoor and the origins of D&D with Griffith. Thanks for joining us, Griffith.
yeah, I'm glad to be here.
And also David, my usual partner in crime
Hey,
here on the
folks.
show. So, we were just talking about, what we're going to talk about. We're talking about how we got started gaming, the Homes Edition, which you
Seems
are a
to
big,
be, yeah,
big
that
proponent
seems to
of,
be
right,
the,
Griffith?
oh yeah, this is the
Yeah,
game.
I got
This
my
is the
original
stuff.
one here, all torn apart.
Well
I
loved.
stole, this is actually Chris's. I stole it from him.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. He's like, are you going to give that back to me? I'm like,
Yeah. So when did you start? What year was it?
oh, my story is weird because I started around 75 or 76.
Yeah.
And I was in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, and they happened to have a mainframe computer there that was running. It was an Iliac running the Plato operating system. And Plato was program logic for automated teaching operations or something like that. And so it was this educational computer system, but they also had the first games. And so I discovered letter D, letter N, letter D on there, D&D.
Nice.
And I started playing on computers before I even knew it was a paper game.
Huh.
So I don't know. It's kind of
Like on message boards or something like that? Did they
no.
have something like that?
It was a real like a shared time computer system. I mean, that D&D was just a solo game. That one.
Yeah.
Later, they had multiplayer ones on that system.
Hmm.
And the big highlight was when I discovered Empire, which is a multiplayer combat game, kind of like
Nice.
Risk with spaceships on a 2D sort of top-down view.
Yeah.
And there's a server emulating it, so I still play that every Sunday night with my friends.
That's cool. Did you ever play Wizardry?
Wizardry, no.
Never got to Wizardry? That came out on the Apple II days. So that would have
Okay.
been 82-ish, I think.
I had Dungeon Master on my Amiga.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think was pretty much stolen from the D&D. Like, there were a lot of copycat programs, people just stealing
Hmm.
other people's stuff and making money off of it back then. Um,
So started in 75-ish time frame. When did you get actually to the tabletop and get to play games on the
um,
tabletop?
moved away from the town in 77 and then just started. I just found a copy of Dungeons and Dragons in a local hobby shop, and they were already starting to boom with it. There was a lot of stuff there. I
Yeah.
think the first thing I found there was a Citadel. Was it or it was a game called Citadel, which was sort of like dungeon board game, only like a player versus dungeon master kind of version of that. And
Hmm.
and it had who made that? I don't remember, but it was just kind of amazing because it talked about miniatures. And so like within a week I went and bought a set of miniatures. So it's 3 wraiths and a Balrog. Like I think it was maybe Grenadier molds.
Yeah.
And you were supposed to play with miniatures, so I got my first miniatures, and then I discovered Ogre, and then I discovered the basic set.
I don't think I ever played Ogre. You talking about the game Ogre?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a first edition too.
Yeah.
It's pretty groovy.
Yeah. I was at a White Elephant in Spokane, Washington in 79, 9 years old. And they sold guns, they sold ammo, they sold fishing equipment, model trains, war games, camo. They sold everything. It was like
RC planes,
RC planes.
everything.
Yeah. It was like the Stranger Things where they go into the surplus store, but that's what it was like. And I had played a few war games, and then I saw that, Dungeons and Dragons, the Holmes edition, sitting there on the shelf there between all the war games. I pulled it out, saw that dragon on the cover. I said, "Oh, I gotta check this out."
It's
And
yeah,
we had nothing. It was just me and my 9-year-old friends who had played a few war games together, and we tried to figure out D&D, and we had a blast doing it.
right. And you probably had to like make up a lot of your own crap
Oh,
too.
we did not know what we were doing for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I remember misreading parts of it and running
Yeah.
my games
Yeah.
wrong.
Whole
Or
concepts we didn't really catch or understand really, and we're just making stuff up to cover. Like we didn't
yeah,
realize how hit dice worked exactly, which seems trivial, but
uh
there
huh.
were so many things not explained, right, in the original rules.
Yeah, and or just explain weird language,
Yeah.
unclear language. Even in Holmes, it's a little, but it's the best one out there, I think.
Yeah. So, Secrets of Blackmoor. Amazing documentary. Why did you do it? How did you get to do that documentary?
Well, I talk about this in most interviews, and so I'll try to be brief. It was just an accident.
Uh-huh.
Met a guy online, and turned out it was Dave Arneson's webmaster. And so he said, we should do a movie. And I was like, well, that's a weird thing to suggest since I'm a filmmaker. So I started doing a lot of research, um, and then I told Chris is also a filmmaker. And I told Chris about it, what I was doing after I'd been researching for about 6 months. And Chris just said, let's go up to the Twin Cities and just spend 10 days shooting and see what we get. And so even then, it was like, we'll just go shoot. It'll just be a fun trip. And I mean, it'll cost us some money, but we'll just shoot and see what happens and see what kind of footage we get out of it and what kind of story comes out of it. And then it took numerous trips, some in other places around the country. And 6.5 years later, we were at the tail end of like, we just got to get this done. So there was a big crunch to kind of get it done. And I still have some regrets about little details, but every filmmaker feels that way. There's always something, you go back and you're like, I don't know why I left that way.
I bet any creative feels that way, right?
Yeah.
You got
And
to
you
at
just
some
gotta
point
like,
sell it, right?
yeah, just unload it,
Yeah.
because it becomes too much of a burden. So we released it, did as much promo as we could with not a huge budget. So mostly it was just me kind of hitting the ground on the internet and talking to everybody I could about it. And then also when we were trying to finish it up, we did a little Kickstarter because we just needed a little bit of extra cash infusion. So people came in and bought DVDs. And then at the same time, I'd been doing all this research, and I was working with Dan Boggs and a couple other guys, Era Winner, Michael, was it Wittig and Kalea, and I forgot who else, but kind of brain damage. Anyway, so we ended up releasing this thing. We just kind of worked on it. As I was editing the movie, I was also working on writing this book with Dan Boggs, which is The Lost Dungeons of Tonisborg. Turn it, make it look pretty, Griff. There we go. That's a hardbound. We have a softbound now. And what else? Yeah, so we have this old dungeon that we found while we were making the movie that had been lost for about 35 years. And
Who created that dungeon? Who started that one out?
that's Greg Svensson. He was the great Svenny.
Uh-huh.
He's kind of I don't know. I hate to say that any one person was like the lead in the Blackmoor bunch as far as the players, but he's one of the players that Dave Arneson writes the most about. And I know that he and Dave were really close. So, but I hear that from everybody. Everybody says like that new Dave is like, describes it sort of like he had a way of making everybody feel like they were his best friend.
Yeah. Yeah. You really get that impression from everyone in the interview.
Yeah.
Interviewed. Yeah.
Everybody except for the people who were at TSR. That's a whole other story. But that's kind of silly.
Did you meet Dave?
Never met him.
No. Okay.
No. When I was a kid, I was a really hardcore gamer as a kid, and one of the things that I did was I subscribed to Space Gamer magazine, which was the metagaming, which is Steve Jackson games, basically. And there was an interview in there with him, I remember, and he couldn't really talk about the lawsuit and stuff, but he kind of hinted at stuff. And then I had also, that was maybe 79. Before then, I found Before then, I found a copy of First Fantasy Campaign.
Yeah,
and I read that. Right? Yeah. And that's kind of, excuse me, I'm coughing. The wind's been blowing and kicking up dust. That was kind of ponderous. Anybody who has read First Fantasy Campaign, especially within the context of the time it was published, if you were reading it then, it was sort of perplexing because Arneson was used to working with an editor. When he worked with Gary was his editor, And so Gary would kind of go in and take Arneson's crazy notes and assemble them into something that people could comprehend, because Arneson is really just like a super duper idea guy. And so First Fantasy campaign is kind of badly structured, and maybe some of the pros could use a little work, you know. But now it's sort of this now, and now that's flipped, because it's like we have this whole text that is in Dave Arneson's writing style, you know.
Right.
And so from a historical perspective, now it's like, oh my God, we have this thing that Judges Guild rarely did much editing. They just took the manuscript as was and published it.
Yeah.
And added some graphics. They redid the maps.
Because you kind of said that a little bit in Foundations of Blackmoor.
Yeah.
How TSR would say they did a lot of editing, so you never knew how much of it was Dave's and how much of it was, TSR claiming to edit.
Yeah, you can. Well, I mean, it's interesting because the space base. See, Dave Arneson, as far as I know, was a fairly. He would never exaggerate what he did, and so there are interviews. I think it was Space Gamer interview where he talks about using all these different types of mechanics when they were developing D&D. Or maybe I don't remember which interview, but he said, we use spell points, we use this, we use that. And now we're starting to dig up stuff, and it turns out that he did all those things, And so a lot of the claims he makes in interviews, you can verify. And in that interview, like Dave talked about, I based the game on a 19th century naval combat game that I devised.
That's where armor class comes from, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think Peterson has that sheet. I'd like to see if him publish that.
Yeah.
Because I have Xeroxes, but I don't have. There's one sheet that has like the combat charts and everything that's missing from that.
Yeah. What we're looking at here, I have, is from unfortunately the lawsuits that went back and forth. But
yeah, I recognize that immediately.
Yeah, public domain here from the lawsuit. And
like one of the person who released that to the public was one of the guys that did research for Secrets of Blackmoor.
Yeah.
Michael Kalea, yeah, and I thought it was great that he was just like, here, go find it, it's there,
Yeah. And I don't know if it's still up or not, but I grabbed a copy as soon as it was public.
There are people that have grabbed the files and are just sharing them.
Yeah.
So you can grab a copy of it. So yeah, I mean, interesting stuff. I haven't actually gone through that archive very closely, just because I'm overloaded. I got so much stuff to go through. And
they have the first draft of D&D with the markups in it and stuff. So yeah, a lot of good stuff in there.
That was interesting to go through.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of the thing I was most interested in. Everything, like the stuff I'm interested in, is stuff that is basically when D&D is published and before. After D&D is published, I'm not really that concerned, unless it relates to Dave Arneson and what he's doing in his lifetime.
You kind of had a heartwarming story about how Dave and Gary got together kind of long after all of this, had dinner together.
Well, that's the thing, is everybody thinks that Gary and Dave hated each other, and they didn't. There was some acrimony. I mean, I think it sounds like Gary did some stupid stuff, but it was a room full of young people, and all this money was starting to pour in, and I mean, it's you can't. If you weren't there, how can you make a judgment? I've talked to Rob Kuntz, and Rob Kuntz talks about events then, and talked to David McGarry, who was there when things were going down, and both of while the facts may match up, their perspectives are a little bit different. And so it's a lot like when somebody gets divorced or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stuff, you mean like creating advanced Dungeons and Dragons and then claiming it's a completely different game? Is that the sort of thing you're...
Well, that's absurd. I should have scanned it. I just Malia last October gave us a bunch of documents that we hadn't seen before. So we have like a whole set of new write-ups that describe the different domains in Blackmoor, and a couple write-ups that look like they relate to Dave Arneson trying to develop a Blackmoor video game, maybe like the year before he passed away.
Interesting.
It's like a proposal for a Blackmoor video game. And in that, there was also a letter from Mike Hirsch, who was the lawyer that represented Arneson. And it's just a really nice letter. And it's a reply to Dave, because Dave is like, what can I do and what can't I do? What can I say? What can I say? And Dave was like, just say that you're the co-author of D&D. They can't deny that you are the co-author of D&D. It's published right there on the cover of all the books.
Yeah.
And then Dave Hirsch goes on to sort of, he just praises him and says, your creation is like, it's right up there with the invention of dice and the invention of cards. It's like such a singular, unique thing that the world has never seen before. And my sense is that he's really saying, like, you're the one that did it, Dave.
That's the fascinating story of your documentary here, because you're taking a bunch of guys who are sitting around maybe a sand table or a ping pong table in the basement and pushing around miniatures, and somehow they got from there with all these ingenious creative leaps to a game where we're all playing make-believe with pretending to be individuals exploring these dungeons, and there's a bunch of really big leaps that the documentary tells us the story of.
I think that in retrospect, that's one thing. The end of the movies really were I was rushing, and I don't think I covered some significance in events in there as clearly as I could have, because I was kind of, part of it was I was talking to a lot of game historians, and so we were talking in coded language, and I'm not sure if I get the point across clearly enough that it's like Dave Arneson is the one who takes people completely off the board. It's just in your head and you're exploring an imaginary world. Brownsteins don't work like that. You're not exploring the world like that. And
can you expand on that a little bit? What was the Braunstein, and how did Dave take that one step further?
The Brownsteins are sort of they're a social interaction game. And so what you have in the Brownstein is everybody is given a persona, and it's a scenario-based game, and you have assets, which can be either information or someone that's on your, it's like you are friends with so and so on your character sheet, secret information about somebody, money, maybe you have some troops, troops like 6 guards or something like that, and then everybody's given sort of an agenda in the game. And so I consider that also to be a role-playing game, but the format, because of how it plays out, I compare it to a character-based movie, in a way, kind of like a soap opera, maybe. There are all these different characters.
Yeah.
Oops, we lost somebody.
Lost David.
Yeah. That's
just your video, David.
Everybody's used to it nowadays. It's just oh, I guess so-and-so popped off for a while. We'll just keep chatting away. It's more like, there's the interaction is between the players. Okay.
Yeah.
And the referee doesn't need to the referee's job is done once the scenario is established and they get the players together and everybody knows who they are and what they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a much different, and it's not necessarily conflict based. It's not really designed for people to be fighting each other and like a really direct player versus player sort of conflict game. It's more about negotiation. Mm-hmm. And whereas in Blackmoor, that's when Arneson creates a situation where you are in spaces that you cannot know about unless the dungeon master is there to tell you and describe to you where you are, and Arneson was, didn't use miniatures when he was running dungeons. It was all, I hate that term, theater of the mind, but it was all NRPG, or it was the Blackmoor style. You don't use miniatures. It's all described. It's a verbal game. You're playing it in your head. You're interacting with a game reality on every level, and where all your senses come into play. which is what becomes the Dungeons and Dragons play method.
Yeah.
Um,
And Rob just really says he was a great DM too.
yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I hear.
Like when he came down and he
I
ran
hear
the game
that.
for Rob and he ran the game for Gary down at Lake Geneva,
Yeah,
Rob seemed like he was just dumbfounded with how good the game was. And it's like he kind of describes it like he knew right then it was going to be something major, something big.
yeah, maybe. I mean, it's hard to tell. I think that he was probably really taken with it from what he says.
Mhm.
I mean, if you go buy D&D and you read the rules and you discover this thing where you can go on adventures and do all this crazy stuff, I mean, that's how we all get hooked into it, right?
Right.
And so I can see where that would be. I just can see where, like, if somebody comes over to your house and is like, I have this game, just act like yourself, like, here's where you are. You're in a hallway. You're going down a hallway, and it's got stone walls, and there's algae on the walls, and there's water dripping from the ceiling, and there are little tiny insects scurrying on the ground. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah.
So, and knowing the sort of literature that was sort of getting popular then.
That
So
literature back in that day, you go read Ashton Smith, or you read Conan, or you read any of the other books.
yeah,
They're so fantastical and just, amazing escapes from reality and the world. And to get to do that in the game must have been a real draw.
well, and Arneson said he was reading Conan novels when he invented the dungeon.
Yeah.
And so I assume there are Conan. I have never read Conan novels. I never gravitated toward that style of fantasy. I was much more, I don't know, more of a Tolkien type.
Yeah.
The C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, Wizard of Earthsea type, which is a little bit different. And yeah, he was watching old black and white monster movies. I mean, things like probably Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff and stuff like that. The Mummy, Dracula, the Werewolf, those kinds of things. And all of those have, like Phantom of the Opera. I mean, that's a dungeon under the city,
Yeah.
I remember reading something by somebody who looked up the movies that were playing on the station in Minneapolis about the time when Arneson came up with the dungeon concept. And one of them really stood out. It was something called the Black Room, which is curious because if you just switch the letters.
Well, I thought there was a
Blackmoor.
I thought there was a Blackmoor movie too. Maybe it was the Black Room. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard. I think that people try to date those things, and I just really question. You could bracket the dates, but it's really hard to get a specific date. I think that Greg Svensson ties his original Dungeon Dive to when he got his license, because it was the first time.
Or driver's license.
Driver's license.
Okay.
So he was like 16 years old or something like that. So it's the first time he could drive over to Dave Arneson's house to game. And he says that it happened over Christmas of 1970. So there's just part of it is just that nobody thought to record this stuff.
Right.
So there isn't a lot of dated material out there.
Yeah.
And so I think it leaves a gap, but I mean, we don't, getting into specifics about, I think dating is kind of, I don't know if it's necessary. All we need to know is what he did.
Yeah.
If you look at, you look in this book, you find a lot of writings that he did about his early games that I assume were write-ups that might have been planned for like a fanzine or something, but never got published. Or I mean, it's hard to tell. But it's the amount of stuff that he had recorded about his adventures was fairly extensive. And then the other thing is just I always talk about the idea of linearity in invention, and people always think it's like this stepping stone thing where you go up. But if you hear the real story of the invention of things, people go up and they go, I'm not sure. And they come back. I'm going to go over here, and they come back. I'm going to go out here. Even with the Brownstein and when Wesley creates the Brownstein, I think that a lot of what they are doing in the Brownstein might have already been existing a little bit within their campaigns, as far as everybody acting like their character and stuff.
The general of whatever troops they were
leading.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so there's that, and then I heard a cat, I think.
Yes, my cat is pleading to get in the room.
Oh, let her in. Just let her in. She'll be happier. With the Brownsteins, there's a couple different variants of it, and they have different properties. And then Wesley wanted to play in it, so Dave Arneson stepped in and ran a couple, I think, Banania scenarios with different plot twists and stuff. And then Dwayne Jenkins started doing his Wild West game, and which was, that's the one that famously kind of stepped from the scenario format to the campaign format.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a question there of like, okay, you've got a multiplayer game. It's really hard to referee a multiplayer RPG.
Yeah. Because
your people are having to cool their heels while you go and talk to the different people, and everybody's taking their turn.
Yeah.
And there was the Lost Frenchman mine in that. And so is it Dwayne that kind of invents the role-playing game? Like, sort of like, there's definitely some kind of bridge between Brownstein and what Dwayne Jenkins was doing, but we have no information. When we interviewed him, he literally had a stroke the same day that Dave Arneson passed away.
Oh no.
Yeah, and so he had a really hard time just remembering most things. He was pretty wiped out. I think it was really taxing when we would go interview him.
Yeah.
I think it was difficult for him to even remember stuff physically. It would just tire him out. And so yeah, there's this bridge in there that's missing, and I think that all of those games are sort of like unique unto themselves types of role-playing games with different properties. There was, like, with Wesley, he was still into the idea of scoring games to see who the winner is. And in the sheet that I got, John Peterson let me use a sheet that he had of Dwayne Jenkins games. It's the only thing that exists. It's like a 2-sided sheet of, like, that's how they did scenarios then. It was just like a piece of paper with writing on both sides of it, and we're going to play this game.
Mm-hmm.
The rest is in here. Yeah, I don't know. We don't really know what happened. I mean, it was kind of amazing when I got to talk to Greg Svensson, and Greg just started revealing all those. It's, the stuff that's in the movie. I kind of condensed it, but started revealing his experience of watching the Wild West game being played,
mm-hmm.
and his memories of that. So I forgot where I was going with that, but
we're talking about Bronstein's and how they transitioned into
it's
like the D&D style role playing.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing is, like, if you want a linearity of the design, then you have Dave Arneson runs a battle of some kind, and everybody's playing an individual character, and they have a situation with a troll under the bridge, and one of the people gets killed. And then after that, the descriptions of the events sort of revolve around the town of Blackmoor.
Mm-hmm.
But now that all these documents came up that we published in Blackmoor Foundations, now that those have come up, it sort of changes the entire like storyline of what was happening when, and it's just really unclear, and so yeah, there's the little flip through on our website.
Yeah, that's a great book, really cool book.
I mean, if you go to tfott.com, you can look at the Blackmoor Foundations page yourself, and you can zoom it in and sort of look at the layout. I think we obscured most of the text, but you can see sort of the images, what the images are. But yeah, just for anybody that happens to be watching, it's like you can pull up the website and go look at the stuff yourself.
Yeah.
I'm kind of meandering. I talked about this stuff. You got to understand, I first started working on this movie 2012, 2013, somewhere in there. And then I
Let's
did
talk
all
about
this.
yeah. Let's talk about some of your more recent projects. So you have quite a bit of stuff on the
Mhm.
website here.
Yeah, we have, I
Blackmoor
mean, you can,
Foundations.
Blackmoor
Yeah.
Foundations is all it's a historical book, but it's really kind of it's like a campaign resource for somebody that wants to do their own Blackmoor. It's not people who are used to like pre-made product, contemporary product where it's all turnkey may not see it as a campaign book.
Hmm.
But as far as somebody who's really into doing the more old school DIY approach, there's a lot of meat in that thing. Dave Arneson, especially reading what Dave Arneson thinks about the different things in his world and stuff. Um, it gives you a much different perspective. Um, and then we got the module by Rob Kuntz that's also set in Blackmoor.
How did that come about? How did that go with Rob?
Um, how did it happen? It was just kind of like, hey, Rob, you want to come to Arnicon?
Uh-huh.
And it's like, okay, and then it was like, well, he was like, all right, and then he was like, oh, I'll make a module. I can run a module there,
Yeah.
and then as long as it's okay that I use Blackmoor, and we talked to Malia, and Malia was fine. Like, sure, Rob can publish a Blackmoor
That's
thing,
cool.
which is kind of, this is the first time Rob Kuntz has published anything for Blackmoor. There is that tradition of like sort of designers respecting each other's creations and not stepping on each other's toes.
Yeah.
In the case of Greyhawk, like there's a lot of material that was made like after Gary was gone.
Yeah.
That isn't. I mean, is it really Greyhawk? I don't know. I would not consider it like Greyhawk because he didn't do it.
Hmm.
And yeah, there it is. I couldn't find my copy, so it's good you pulled that up. That's the cover we did. We were in a hurry, so we did that cover, and we're going to be releasing a different version with a different cover because this is kind of it was the edition we were going to sell at the convention, but
Okay.
we had some issues arise that took us away from doing the design of the book. And so we pre-sold a bunch at the convention, and we had to just crank them out and get them done.
Yeah.
So we're going to change the cover so there's just like a standard version that isn't like the official Arnicon version. So if you're like a D&D collector type, you better get one of these because they won't be out there very long. Yeah, and there won't be a lot of them. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not. An AD&D module is not going to sell in the 10,000 copies range,
Right. Yeah.
like a WotC publication or something like that.
Yeah. We talked to Rob. Gosh, it's almost been a year now since we talked to Rob, but he just had nothing but good things to say about Dave.
Yeah.
He's got this book, True Genius. I don't know if you can even get this book right now.
I don't know if it's, I would go to threelinestudio.com.
Yeah.
That's his website, and you can get stuff there. Yeah, I mean, Rob's been really great. When he came to the convention, Malia always comes down, Dave's daughter, and it was like, oh wow, these people. I didn't realize that Rob was like knew Malia and was like, hey Malia, how are you? And like,
Yeah.
oh Rob,
That's
and
cool.
so there is that sort of like there is that family aspect to the people that were there when it first started, and everybody knows everybody. And Rob really is the one that he's the link between the Lake Geneva crowd and the Minneapolis crowd, or St. Paul, Minneapolis, Twin Cities crowd. And yes.
Tell us about Arnicon. Is that
Arnicon is just it's a small convention. We're not we just thought it would be fun to have a convention and just like get everybody together and do some gaming. It's pretty small. Last year I think it was maybe 150 people. The first year it was like 60 people, and of those 60 people, probably 20 of the people were like featured guests or people that were like original Blackmoor players. So it was like the people who made it to the first one were like, oh my God, I'm just gaming with all these, original pre-D&D gamers. Wesley's there, McGarry's there, Ross is there.
Yeah.
And others. Martin, the Wandering Elf, was there. And several people. Gail Gaylord came. So that, and it's still just small like that. So the ratio of like I hate to use the word stars, but a significant gamers is pretty big compared to, like, say, when you go to a convention with like 5,000 people at it.
Yeah.
And you're very likely to get into a game with somebody that you'll be glad you gamed with them, because it's just like a real treat.
Someone who ran the first Bronsteins.
Yeah, and tickets, tickets, the advanced tickets are available now. So games like the really sort of the choice games, like everybody wants to play in a Brownstein. It's Brownstein like Frankenstein.
Got it.
Or Banania, which is the other Brownstein. Those are likely to fill up really fast. So if you get a pre-order ticket, you get first pick-ins of events. So it's worth, if you plan to go, get your ticket now. And what else can I say? I don't know. It's just a lot of fun. Run a lot of old games. I always try to bring something weird to play. I ran Fletcher Pratt Naval War Game last time with my big lead ships, and we have Mike Carr brings. There was a little convention called Minicon, and so we're going to do we kind of have a Minicon within Arnicon, and so all the Fight in the Skies crowd shows up. So there's like 20 gamers that are just hardcore Fight in the Skies players.
Wow, and that's Mike Carr, right? He was big on that.
Yeah, so they come in and they take over. Last year, we tried to give them their own room, and we had to squeeze in some other tables, but it's hard to know how many tables you can fit into a space when we don't live in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
And so we ended up overbooking their room, so it was a little noisy and crowded, but this year and this year we're going to give them more space, so they'll have a lot more.
Nice.
Yeah. And then,
I just ran it In Search of the Unknown, Mike's Adventure from the basic Dungeons and Dragons set. Again, like a month ago, and I'd run it last in like 79 or 80. I'm not sure which year. And it was such a great adventure, and I didn't really appreciate it for how neat it was.
I have one sitting in that box I held up earlier.
Yeah. Yep, that's where I got mine. It came in the box before they had B2 in the boxes.
Just to do a more product pitch, here's the other book you see that as you scrolled up. This is the paper cover version of the Lost Dungeons of Tonnisborg, and it's a lot cheaper than the hardbounds. And you can order one of those from us. That's the dungeon that was lost for 35 years, that was created before D&D was published.
Who created that dungeon originally?
Greg Svensson.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because you look at. I always talk about this, but Greg says that Dave told him how to create the dungeon, and it was all created with random die rolls.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Well, the dungeon looks exactly like Blackmoor dungeon.
It does, yeah.
So I
suspect
unique,
the 45-degree angles there.
Yeah, all the different. It's weird.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of intentionality in it. Like, it's just like this splatter of spaghetti on each level. And so it kind of indicates that maybe not only did Dave invent the dungeon concept and create the first maps, but he created the first random dungeon generator.
Yeah.
And it's very likely that he was generating Blackmoor dungeon randomly like that, and then populating it.
Yeah, that's cool.
And
I see that it's billed as an official Blackmoor product. What's the status of the Blackmoor IP at this point?
I think that Blackmoor trademark belongs to Malia, and they're it's just back with the family. I mean, that's kind of a cool thing.
That is a cool thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the person who kind of facilitated that was he's caught a lot of flack, and people can say whatever they want, but the guy that I'm having brain damage, the guy that did the TSR museum in Lake Geneva, Ernie and
I don't know who the other person.
I'm having brain damage right now because I know him and I can't remember his name. Anyway, he had bought the trademark because TSR let it lapse.
Oh, wow.
No
yeah,
kidding.
and so Paul Stormberg called me and was like, "There's a guy who has the trademark. He'd probably be willing to sell it to the estate." So I did a lot of negotiation, and Chris kind of worked on the legal side, and God, why can't I remember his name? Anyway, he's a bit vilified in the gaming community, but he really did a really solid move by relinquishing the trademark so that the family of Dave Arneson could own the trademark to Blackmoor, because there are a lot of families out there that, you know, they don't own it, you know,
Yeah.
like Gary's family doesn't own
Guy's
Blackmoor.
family. Yeah.
Yeah.
Greyhawk. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't own Greyhawk. You know, that belongs to WotC, and they can do whatever they want with it. So that's kind of a weird thing. Like, I don't know. I mean, Ernie's kind of like a prolific creator of things for RPGs. I'm sure that if they could cut Ernie loose on doing a bunch of Greyhawk, he would just go to town, you know?
Was Ernie's character Tensor? Was it one of his
Yeah.
characters? Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember those old
Ernest.
books. Yeah.
Anagram Ernest.
Yeah. Those old books, the DMG, the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons book, the basic book. Let me pull this up here. Show this tab. This is not necessarily a copy you can purchase right now, but I do have a hard copy, so I don't feel too bad showing
Yeah.
this.
This is the basic.
This is the forward of the basic. I just love these. They would always talk about these things that I, never could see. The Castle and Crusade Society of Blackmoor, all this stuff, and
Yeah.
Negacoot and Giant Kingdom. I think that might be a typo. It's supposed to be Great Kingdom, I think.
Yeah, it's probably supposed to be Great Kingdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, all these things were, for a kid growing up, far removed from Lake Geneva. It was neat. It was almost like little archaeological artifacts. And it's like, oh man, I wish I could see this. I wish I could do that.
Yeah, it's sad that they had that falling out because,
Yeah.
for a company that was like booming and needed and could sell product like crazy,
Yeah.
they could have released a Blackmoor system and a Greyhawk system.
Absolutely, yeah.
I was kind of when AD&D came out, I stopped playing D&D because it just seemed it nailed things down too much within a context of a Greyhawk system, and I just wasn't. My group went off to play Empire of the Pale Throne instead.
Yeah, so there's a huge difference between D&D and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Almost like there's this huge difference between, people that like a straightforward, simple system where it's a lot of rulings,
Yeah,
versus people that want it just completely every last nuance of a rule nailed down, right? And I'm finding myself more and more drawn back to that rulings type of simple system, fast resolution.
Well, maybe it's because you said you started with war games, and I'm kind of the same way. I had, some war game experience early on too, and so people who aren't familiar with war games are okay with an RPG that is actually a war game disguised as an RPG. To my way of thinking, anyway. And whereas I'm like, if it's going to take 4 hours to do a big battle, let's just get out 1,000 Napoleonic miniatures and
do it right.
Yeah, get the felt on the table and start moving armies around and, divide the players up between two teams, and now let's go after each other,
Yeah.
It's just a mindset, I suppose.
Yeah. I just like I like to have more time to explore, more time to, find cool things versus, we just spent the last 2 hours doing 3 rounds of combat.
Yeah.
We had a lot of numbers. We did a lot of math, and nothing really got resolved.
Yeah, and everybody's taking their turn, and everybody's having to wait. It's like,
yeah.
For me, it was just at a certain point, it just clicked, and I was like, wow, when I was a kid and I played the original D&D game with my basic set and my 3 little booklets, I just had a blast.
Yeah.
And I thought about it, and I was like, the rules seem sort of incongruous. There's no like overarching like universal mechanic that you apply to everything. There are all these little fiddly rules where it's like, oh, for this one you roll a d12, for that one you roll a d6, and whatever.
Yeah.
But it worked, and I think the probabilities that they put into that system, a lot of the concepts that went into that system make it work really well, as far as like like you didn't have perception checks, and so everybody had the same chance to see or be aware or be surprised as anyone else. And so that kind of because I don't know, it's weird when you have like a gradation and ability for a character based on their level going up. Then that means that when you're first level, you probably shouldn't be able to do anything. And you look at the thief character, that's a really good example of sort of a failed design, because a first level thief has like maybe a 20% chance to do half the stuff on their.
That was rough. The D&D thieves.
Yeah.
I really like it. The systems that go back to where it's like, don't roll a check, just tell me what you're doing. And if it's reasonable, it'll happen. And if it's not reasonable, we'll roll a check, If there's a chance it'll fail and there's a bad thing happening when it does, as opposed to everything, is some sort of rule for how you do it.
I'm sorry.
No,
I've heard varying reports about how Dave handled ability scores and checks in his game, because there's no real checks in original D&D that's out print, but some people say that he had like a system for checks. Have you ever encountered anything like that in your?
Well, it was our research that kind of revealed that, because when we were doing, we were just looking through a collection of documents that had belonged to Dan Nicholson, and interviewing his family, and they had it. I almost didn't see it, I went back through a stack and I just suddenly found this piece of paper, and I was like, oh my God, I'm looking at character stats. Only these character stats are for a noble family. And each of them has an ability. There are 6 abilities. They're a little different. Like cunning, we pretty much think cunning became wisdom. What was I going to say about that? And then so the fact that he's creating these values indicates that he's doing something with these 2 die rolls, right? And then on top of that, in corner of the tabletop, he talks about having these events that occur to the nobles. And so it seems very reasonable that he was doing like a 2 die roll against maybe a health attribute to determine if a noble becomes ill or dies or something like that in one of the families in these big campaigns. Where else was I going with that? And then you see you do see his, Dave Arneson's original attributes do appear in the original edition of D&D under the magic swords. The magic swords have a 2 die attribute roll for 2 attributes, and I forgot what they are now. It's like intelligence and like ego or something like that.
Ego was one for sure.
Ego. Yeah. I mean, I use it, but my brain is just too full of stuff. But so you can, and it's, Dave Arneson did invent the magic sword. So he was just, that whole group, they were really into doing stuff with numbers to simulate things.
Yeah.
What do you know about how the Blackmoor campaigns apparently switched from people playing themselves in the game to playing characters with stats and numbers?
I think that, I think they had stats really early on. There are definitely some early character sheets out there. And I think they had those stats fairly early on. I don't think they weren't using stats in Brownstein's. McGarry's character sheet is a good example of a 2 die stat. He has 2 things. First, he has the records for H.W. Dumbo, which are in his chemistry book, I think. And that's kind of funny because I think he ran the sorceress out of that book. And whenever he had to cast a spell because he was taking chemistry, Dave would quiz him on chemistry stuff. And so if he could answer a chemistry question out of his book that he was studying to get through the class, correctly, then he succeeded in casting the spell.
There's a mechanic for you. Wow.
Yeah. And what else with that? Yeah, so McGarry has H.W. Dumbo, which is interesting because there are time logs. And Arneson was using 1070 when he says the campaign starts. So that's another reason why it's kind of interesting, because in Corner of the Tabletop, he publishes all this stuff. Well, it's at least a month behind. He had to write it, print it, get it out. And so Corner of the Tabletop, where he publishes it, is in 1971. So it's entirely possible that he might have written the stuff a month or two earlier and then published it in Corner of the Tabletop.
Like you're saying, the guy that remembers the driver's license and doing the gaming over the Christmas of 1970.
Yeah.
And then it published 1 month later, it'd be 1971.
And then the other thing about that, well, so I just wanted to stick on the character thing, though. But yeah, so we have the stuff from H.W. Dumbo, which is a really early character for McGarry. McGarry is really methodical, and so every time he had a new character, he would write it on this sheet. So he has this double-sided sheet with about 20 characters. And so that kind of, and they're all 2-die rolls, and they all have like all these crazy attributes and stuff. Because they hadn't really separated an attribute from a skill. And I think that there's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's pretty evident that that's where that is all coming from. It's coming out of Blackmoor, all these attributes.
Mm-hmm.
Where was I going with that? Yeah, does that kind of answer the question? Maybe I went off in the wrong direction.
No, I think that's a good answer. I'm curious, though. I thought there was like a scenario early on where they played themselves as characters transported somehow to the Blackmoor world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a write-up that's in. I've heard that story from everybody, and everybody kind of remembers it differently. And so then there's also the Dave Arneson write-up where he writes it from his own perspective. And he describes himself arriving. His plane crashes in Blackmoor. Somehow he's on his way back from Sweden and Norway, and his plane crashes over Greenland. And yeah, and so he describes his encounters with, like, he just writes a story about himself. But it's kind of weird. Like, is he just writing the story, or is he using his Blackmoor methods to create the story sort of like as a solo game and then writing about the story? We may never know that, but it seems almost possible. And then his compatriots all show up there looking for him. The other thing is that at the time, like, the idea of playing a fantasy game was sort of frowned upon. Like it was bad enough being a nerd in the 70s when the game was popular, you know. Imagine if you're in a group of really hardcore military simulator type guys, and they're all hardcore model builders, and some of them might even be military, ex-military, or ready to go in the military because they've done their ROTC, their Reserve Officer Training Corps training. Yeah, there we go, ROTC. So it's entirely. Greg said that their little group, it was just a couple of them that would go over to Dave's house to play Blackmoor, and he said they did this for like a year before it really got out there. So, and then just, I mean, it's really hard to date this stuff. I hate to put a concrete date on it, because then researchers down the line are going to be like, this is the date. And my preference is to say, I don't know, let's just bracket this because we don't know. Leave the possibility for these other options there. So yeah, I mean, it's in there. You know, they arrive and they're looking for Dave, and they end up. I think they end up at Blackmoor, and they end up in the first siege of Blackmoor happens.
Yeah, there is like a big army at the end. I remember the story. Yeah.
Yeah, and he describes that a dragon appears. And so that's got to be Gertie, you know. And so that's sort of like the first appearance of Gertie in a story. Like every time he does adventures, there's like one element where you're like, oh my God, that's like a fantasy element.
Yeah.
You know, there's also the write-up he sent to Lake Geneva, which I'm still on the fence who that was for. It might have been for his own gamers, because they would use that tone, like a kind of lofty tone, like
Yeah.
really important things. And so in that write-up, he talks about the Red Witch Coven. So right there, you have something different that's not standard medieval gaming like they were doing in the Castles and Crusades Society. And then you have those write-ups like where he arrives in the one where his friends go looking for him, and they end up at the castle of a giant, and the giant is basically firing what effectively is a crossbow for the giant, but it's more like a ballista for them. And then their die rolls are bad, so they're not doing very well. They got kind of beat up, so they decide to leave. And then all the others, there's that hint of Dwayne Jenkins going down in the dungeon and getting bit. It's like he doesn't reveal what happens to Dwayne, but it's like he goes into the dungeon and then he comes back, and his crew comes back terrified. He comes back, and the girl that they took in the dungeon for God knows what reason is missing. And then just things like just decorating the dungeon, like the buckets of blood. They find buckets of blood, and they're like, "Oh my God, there's a vampire. There's got to be vampires around here." It's very of its time.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense that there's more out there to be discovered, or has it pretty much all been uncovered? What's your sense of that?
Every time I think that it's all been found, somebody will come up to me and be like, "Oh, I got this folder of stuff that Dave gave to me." And my big thing is there's a balancing act. A lot of people get really angry because they feel like I'm hoarding stuff and not revealing stuff. And I try to, like, with this, the minute we got the stuff that went into the Blackmoor Foundation's book, I'll hold it up again. The minute we got it, within about 6 months, I think it was, we had this book, right? And we just pumped it all out there so that people could start taking a look at it and sort of studying what Dave was doing. The problem is that a lot of this stuff belongs to the estate. Like, people have been like, "Well, you should just scan it and put it on the web," and then it just goes everywhere. Like John Bobek's photos, I've seen those everywhere now, and people don't even credit John for having taken them.
What are those photos of games and stuff?
Yeah, they're from the probably the 1969.
Oh wow.
IFW convention, the original Gen Con.
Yeah.
And so he was just there. I mean, the guy's still alive. He runs games at GaryCon,
Yeah.
He was there, and he took all these black and white pictures with his little, probably K1000 or something like that. And yeah, I mean, and they're great. He's got pictures of Dave, he's got pictures of Gary, and pictures of a lot of the people gaming. And there's a picture of Gary gaming that just appears everywhere now on the internet, and it doesn't have any attribution or anything. I mean, that's kind of my big deal, is like, if you want to, like, if you like the movie and you want to grab a skill because you see something cool in our movie, feel free to grab a still, but just make sure to put a citation on it. And then I don't care. When you start grabbing stills and using them without citations, I just recently found a website that's just like, it's like packed full of stills from our movie, and I'm going to do a takedown notice on it, because it's bad form. There's no respect, that, I mean, with anything on the internet,
Pictures from back then were so rare.
Yeah.
I mean, this is me playing in 84 or something like that.
Oh, wow. Which one are you?
I'm the DM there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And it's like, you wish your parents had taken more, but then you think back to that time, it's like, pictures were hard to take back then. You had to go get the film developed. It cost a lot of money. It's like,
I don't have any pictures of my gaming days. I have a
Yeah.
couple pictures. I just found a picture of like my medieval knights
Yeah.
when I was playing with them. I took it with a little tiny Kodak camera,
Yeah.
and that's because I was a nerdy kid. I would take pictures of my toys, uh, and it's the only one. I had some others of like my army men, my Airfix army men. I would take the rug and put books to make mountains.
Yeah.
Lift up this like piece of carpet, and then I'd set up all my little HO men on this giant setup because I had thousands of them. And somewhere I have a photo of, and it's not good. Like I know what it is, but it's like nothing anybody else would ever look at. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's cool that you have that, you know.
I know.
But
I only have a few of them.
But if it got out there and like people were just using it like without crediting you, that would be kind of shitty. Pardon my grammar.
Or crediting my mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the stories that you have in the Blackmoor movie about them finding gamers. It's like, how do you find gamers in 1970?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really cool how it's like, hey, they found this book about war games, a war game, you know, in the library. And then they looked at the library card, and then they looked at the names on the library card and looked in the phone book and started just calling people. That's
Right.
great. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Back in the 70s, like the idea of calling somebody before the internet and like identity theft and all that weirdness.
Yeah.
It was just normal to call
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
like,
Yeah. You just,
hello, I'm trying to
get a phone
reach
book.
so-and-so, you know,
Yeah.
does so-and-so live there? Yeah, let me get him for you, you know.
Yeah.
Like, in this day and age, if I don't recognize the number,
It's click.
yeah, or the email, I'm like, I'm not going to touch any of those links in that email, you know.
Yeah.
That's Satan spawn stuff.
Yeah. So what's in your future? What you got coming up?
Taking a sip of my Coke.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
I see that there's a part 1 right there on that
Volume 1.
DVD.
Yeah.
Or volume 1, which suggests to me that maybe there might be a volume 2 in the future.
You know, it took 6.5 years to make. It was sort of like buying a really nice house, but not having the house as far as the expense. I won't reveal how much it costs, but you're talking about like in a nice area, you know, not like it was like for some people, maybe a couple years income going into this project.
Yeah.
And then, you know, we didn't expect it to make millions of dollars because it's an indie film, but I don't know, it just didn't do that well, you know. And so it's funny because I redacted a lot of footage from it that I was intentionally saving so I'd have juicy bits for the next film. So they didn't go into the first film, and it just doesn't. I don't know. I'm not sure if we're gonna ever make another one.
Yeah.
To be honest with you,
It's a shame that, you know, the company that owns D&D now is so closed off to anyone outside doing the stuff. At least with
yeah,
Blackmoor, you had access to the family that owned the IP, right? So you could do the movie and do it your way. And
I tried reaching out to WotC, and
yeah.
I mean, I didn't have any like direct access.
Hmm.
But I would post on their forums and stuff, and you know, like, hey, I'm out here.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure they just like suppressed anything I did.
Yeah.
WotC never talked to me.
Yeah.
Which is strange because they use Peterson as their official historian. And there's kind of, I don't know. It's like there's a whole historical community out there. You know?
Yeah. That's unfortunate. Now you have YouTube videos that you're doing, the informal game.
Yep.
I watched several of those. Those are very cool. So if you haven't watched those, anyone watching this, check that out. Definitely check
Excuse me. We just dropped one where I talk about home ruling.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how much I like it and why I think it's a valid way to play. And they're just kind of, you know, they're I try to keep it conversational like I'm being right now. It's just like, hey,
I like them.
When I got a problem,
ruling?
this is home ruling. Like,
Home
you know,
rules.
when you make up rules on the fly.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And they become sort of like a house rule.
Yeah.
Or house ruling, I guess, house rules. And, you know, whether it's just a variant or else maybe like something that needs to plug a hole that's a gap in the rules.
Sure.
I don't know. I'm a huge proponent for the old way of playing, and sort of like just really adventure and story focused stuff where the mechanics don't come into it. You don't have a character with like a million attributes, and the other thing is the min maxing. Like these newer editions, you can min max these characters and have them doing like 40 points of damage around, like or more.
I've always been a fan of like the tournament style games where you're handed a character and you make the most out of it.
Yeah,
That's
deal
how
with
original D&D was, right? The DM rolled the stats, or
yeah,
in Dave's case, he didn't even tell you what the stats were. He had them to himself.
yeah. His
And had to
original
find them
players
out.
didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's what. Getting
how
back to your original question
Yeah.
that Dave had, you were asking about them playing themselves and then not playing themselves. As far as I know, some people just kept playing themselves. And like in the movie, Ross said that he couldn't remember the dwarf's name. It's very likely that their dwarf's name was just Ross.
Ross.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and Peter was the Wizard of the Wood, but he was just Peter to everybody too. And so they I mean, it's kind of weird because there's sort of this evolution where people expect sort of a critical role type. You take on the role and LARP your way through the game. And I'm not sure if they did some of that, but I'm not sure that everybody did that.
Yeah.
And there wasn't time. I mean, I was talking to Chris about there wasn't time to do that. You got a table full of people and you want to forge ahead and get things done. When somebody gets up and orates for 15 minutes, it's like you just ate up everybody's time for 15 minutes.
Yeah, the groups were big, right? They would invite, it's like, hey, we're having a game this weekend. Come and join us if you want to come and join us. And they could get some pretty big groups. And they would play that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the funny thing about the whole critical role culture is like, it's sort of like people LARPing as gamers is like when you watch it, it's like people LARPing as what other people think gamers are like rather than people just playing a game. Because when you watch like a live play, it's never like critical role,
Yeah. Yeah. People actually playing the game.
Yeah. And it's not very exciting to watch people play on a live play.
I share my live plays, not because I think they're entertaining, but because it's a tool that I think other DMs getting ready to run that adventure, they could, hey, how did that encounter go? And they can kind of slide over to that point in the video and see how that encounter went. And that's why I share them. I don't have any illusions that they're entertaining to watch full videos of them.
That's why I posted some of mine. It was just like people keep asking me, like, how do you, what's it like to play with Griff? Yeah. And so we posted a couple of me playing, and people can see how I run a game. And I think that watching a live play doesn't really well, let's just say it doesn't impress people with my dungeon mastering prowess, because it's just not that interesting unless you're in the game.
Unless you're playing. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, we're about to wrap it up here. Any last words, Griffith, for us?
No, I'm just glad you invited me onto the show.
I'm glad you came on. It was great.
Yeah. And then, we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just, if anybody's watching, please just check out our store, tfott.com. We've got a lot of cool stuff there. And then, of course, if you're into sort of the classic style of RPG play or want to know about it, then we have the informal game channel on YouTube.
Go check those out, everyone.
Yeah, it's all linked there on the website. So
thank you very much, Griffith. And
thanks, guys.
We'll talk to you later.
Yeah. Have a good night.